Welcome, welcome. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes. And another thing to note, so as you wait, we encourage you to adjust your view settings so you can have the best viewing experience possible. So in order to do this, you can go to the view settings in the top right corner of your Zoom window and then adjust it so that it's side-by-side speaker. And in that sense, you'll be able to see the slideshow that's being screen shared while also viewing all the panelists nicely. And Maggie will be sending this message into the chat. And so you can try it out. And if you have any questions throughout the general presentation, so for the first hour from 2 to 3 p.m., feel free to direct message Serena Cheng, one of our co-hosts. All right, given that there's nobody else in the waiting room right now, we're just going to get started. So good afternoon, everybody. We are so excited to welcome you to Ignite Fair's 2021 American University panel. My name is Olivia Young.
And my name is Angelina Zhang. We are the Ignite Fair co-chairs and your NCs for today. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Ignite Fair, we are a subdivision of a nonprofit called Pledges for Change, and our mission is to inspire youth in the GTA to take action in their communities through both volunteerism and leadership.
And for the past few months, our team at Ignite Fair has been working diligently to plan and execute this university panel for you all. So we're so excited to have you join us today. During today's panel, we'll spend the first hour in the main room with 5 panelists, where Angelina and I will MC and pose questions to them. Then from 3 to 4, all of you will have the opportunity to hop into our breakout rooms and ask our panelists questions in one-on-one or group discussions.
Yeah, and of course, we do recognize that applying to American universities as an international student can be an incredibly daunting process. There's oftentimes a knowledge gap for Canadian students about what exactly US universities are looking for in terms of academic requirements, extracurriculars, or application essays. And that's why we do really hope that our US panelists can give you a clear picture of what life is like at different universities and their respective application processes.
Now, before we kick off with our introductions of our panelists, we'd like to give you a quick overview as to the 4 subtopics we'll be covering for today. So we'll be going over choosing a university or program, advice and tips, the application process, and finally, financial aid and scholarships. Please also note that during the call, we've set the permissions so that you can only message the co-host. So if you have any questions, just direct them to Serena Cheng, one of our co-hosts. Throughout the first hour, you are encouraged to ask any questions, but feel free to do so through the chat only, as we'd like to avoid any audio disruptions. And without further ado, let's have our panelists introduce themselves.
So hi everyone, my name is Jerry. I am a rising sophomore at Princeton University studying operations research and financial engineering with a couple other intended minors. So I originally went to Richmond Hill High School. So I don't know if anyone in the crowd is from RHHS, but it was a great time there. A fun fact about me is that I applied to be a part of the Ignite Fair committee when I was in 10th grade, and I was rejected. And then I still am sad to this day. But you know what? I'm glad to be here today. So life comes in full circle.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Maya. I just graduated from Bayview Secondary School, and I will be attending the University of Pennsylvania at the Wharton School. So I'm an incoming freshman. I'm not really sure what I'm going to study just yet. So yeah, I'm kind of undecided in that field. A fun fact about me is that last year I was one of the co-chairs for Ignite Fair, and so it makes me super duper happy to be able to come back, in another capacity and still, support the organization in a different way.
Hi everyone, I'm Kelly. I am a rising sophomore at UC Berkeley. I'm studying electrical engineering and computer science, and I'm also pursuing a certificate in design innovation. I also graduated from Bayview Secondary last year when COVID was a thing. And a fun fact, I guess, I'm actually leaving to go back to Berkeley tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. So glad to be spending my last day with you guys, but very tired. So I apologize if I sound a little bit groggy.
Hi everyone, my name is Michelle. I'm a rising junior at Penn, and I went to Bayview as well. So I'm seeing there's a lot of Bayview students. Fun fact about me, I feel like I'm like the old one out of the bunch because I'm a junior. So I did actually have like an in-person first year, and then everything went online. So if you have any questions about like what school is like when everyone is able to look at each other in real life, feel free to direct those towards me. But yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Mika. I'm going to Boston University. I'm going to graduate in the year 25, so I'm going to be an incoming freshman as well, as well as like Maya and I are going to be incoming freshmen. I'm considering studying political science. I might do like a double major in international relations, who knows. I also came from Bayview Secondary School, and fun fact about me, my dog came into the room when I was like rushing to get everything started, so he's just on my lap right now. I want to say hi. The green screen's kind of blurring him out. He's the same color as my background. Yeah, that's all about me.
Great. And our final two panelists, Eric Shen and Marjorie Chen, will be joining us for the breakout room session for the second hour.
All right, so without further ado, we can jump right into our questions, beginning with the first subtopic, which is choosing a university or program.
So to start off, many students often feel very overwhelmed by the sheer number of schools to choose from in the States. So for each of our panelists, why did you choose your school and area of study? We can start off with Jerry.
So for me, when I was, applying to American schools, I only applied to a bunch of private schools because personally for me, I prefer like a smaller class size. And I also really value the opportunity to study like across discipline. So that's why I was leaning toward like more liberal arts, smaller size private schools. So I ultimately chose Princeton because one, it is one of the best school in the world. And two is because because when I was applying, I actually really wanted to be a physics major, and Princeton was known for having a lot of resource in support of research in physics and a lot of amazing professors in the faculty. So ultimately, my kind of desire for be able to study cross discipline or like the freedom to switch majors came in handy when I like went into the school, and I was like, okay, maybe I don't want to do physics for all 4 years or the rest of my life. So then I kind of switched majors 4 times in the first semester and ended up being why I'm here today. And then I never really had like a distinct or like a burning passion for any of the subjects, I guess, but like I knew that like what I wanted to do, which is to like have an opportunity for continuous learning, to be in a field of work and learn something new each day. So I ultimately ended up with why I'm studying today, which is like financial engineering. Like I don't even know what it is. It's just like a weird thing that Princeton has. Kind of combines like economics, like game theory optimization with like math and finance. So I thought that was really cool. I think that was the biggest reason why I chose it, because it looked cool. And I think like I guess if you were going to study something for all 4 years, or like perhaps to leverage that background for the rest of your life, like I would just follow my passion and choose something that like really interests me, like regardless of what like other people think. Because I think like if we ended up going to these like top-notch schools, then you're probably really smart and really competent, and whatever you're studying, like you will excel in it. So I wouldn't worry too much about other things rather than what interests you. That's kind of my spiel. Yeah.
So for me, I definitely second what Jerry was saying in terms of the whole, like a lot of US universities do focus on that, like I guess what they call like whole person development, that kind of thing. Whereas like in Canada, you're applying to like a specific program, like, oh, I'm going to do health sciences, I'm going to do computer science, that kind of thing. And so because similar to Jerry, I have like a lot of interests. I don't know if I'm particularly like I don't think I was born to do like finance or something like that, So I do appreciate that opportunity specifically at Penn. I'm sure Michelle will be able to attest to like what it's actually like in practice. But from what I've heard from webinars is stuff along the lines of, even though you are, say, in Wharton, like the business school, you do have that opportunity, and they encourage you to expand your breadth and take classes that don't necessarily pertain to your major. And, they encourage people to like tack on minors or like pursue like other areas of interest. And I think that was something that I really appreciated, considering that I come from, a background where I'm like, oh, I don't have a burning passion to just study one thing. In terms of studying business, that was just kind of something I decided, in the sense that I was like, oh, I did DECA in high school. I loved DECA. So I was like, all right, I guess, maybe we'll just study business. So that's kind of where I am here. But I think even within that, there's so many different sects. Within that, there's like finance, consulting, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's where I am now.
Yeah, awesome. So again, I second everything that Jerry and Maya said, just to echo kind of what they're talking about in terms of interdisciplinary fields going into the US. I also, surprise, surprise, didn't know what I wanted to do. I think I applied to like health sciences, businesses, tech programs, because I just had so many different interests that I wanted to combine somehow. And looking at the programs in Canada, of course, like they all seemed really interesting, but I didn't see myself like progressing and growing as a student, like because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, of course. So I guess Berkeley was kind of one of my top choices going into the admission process. First of all, due to its location, as well as proximity to different opportunities like big tech, startup culture in San Francisco is pretty big. So that was definitely one of the biggest factors. But I think when I was actually applying, my parents told me that they didn't want me moving like 4,000 miles away. So I kind of put it in the back of my mind, but it was still something that I really wanted to pursue, since the West Coast is so like rich in terms of opportunities that you can have like in tech and CS, all of that. But I actually applied to Berkeley as a bioengineering major, which seems kind of random right now. But just to explain, I kind of saw bioengineering as something that combined all of my interests. It was both technology, health sciences, and a little bit of like business in terms of like, if you want to go into industry, you need that kind of background in terms of reaching out to people, like having social skills, all that. So I was interested in that field, and I also wanted to keep CS and tech in the back of my mind. So when I actually got to Berkeley, I didn't really just like throw away like bioengineering because CS is so popular at Berkeley. I kind of just kept it in my mind as I was going through the semester. But then ultimately, I ended up switching to electrical engineering and CS, which is the like special program in the engineering school at Berkeley. Just because I saw so many different like opportunities for me outside of grad. For bioengineering, it seemed like something that I would have to really grind hard in undergrad if I wanted to get a job right out of school. So that was one thing. And also I just found myself like exploring other disciplines at Berkeley, like design and other creative fields that kind of meshed well with that technology aspect, which I probably wouldn't have gone otherwise, since there's just a lot of diverse backgrounds that other people can have to really shape the major that you want in a particular way that fits your interests. So that was like kind of the big reason why I switched majors. And then another reason why I wanted to go abroad and go to the US was because I feel like as students, like, first of all, you can kind of tell because we all go to Bayview here except for Jerry. There's kind of like a sheltered environment going on in like this community that we live in, which is not like bad or anything. I just kind of wanted to explore outside of this little community bubble that I was in for so long, and wanted to be more exposed to like a diverse set of, or a diverse community of people with different backgrounds. And I definitely think I got that when I went to first year. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo what Kelly said. I think that going to schools like Bayview and like this community is a huge bubble. And I think like going to a US school is like, there's like a huge culture shock because the people that you meet are so different. And I think that's one of the main things that differentiates the culture at American schools. I think specifically why I chose Penn, I personally was someone who was like, I'm going to do business. That's the one thing I'm good at, so I'm going to pursue it. Looking back, I didn't really know that much about business after coming to Penn. I will say that Wharton in particular, even though you do get the ability to pursue electives and minors, I will give a warning that like the majority of your courses will be business courses. So probably like 80% of the curriculum will be like taking finance, marketing, management courses. So keep that in mind. But I think the benefit of choosing a school like Penn is that there are 4 schools, right? So you don't have to go to Wharton if you don't like to do business. Choosing the college will also give you a chance to do Wharton courses and then do like other things that you're interested in. So I think if you're looking for flexibility, Penn is a good school, maybe not Wharton, just because it's really, really specialized. I literally I'm doing a computer science minor, but like that's it. Like I don't have space for any other electives because I'm choosing to do that. So definitely know what you want to pursue a little bit before you're going in, and that way you can sort of shape like the classes that you take. But yeah, Wharton is pretty business focused, and I did DECA. I did this organization called Target Alpha, so I was always pretty like business minded. So yeah, I was either going to go to Penn or some other undergrad business school. So I was someone who was pretty dead set on pursuing that. Yeah.
All right, and I guess I'm last. So I chose Boston, and I'm a political science major. It kind of seems like unnecessary to look so far ahead, and like by all means, like if you guys aren't looking like 4 years into the future, like starting at your freshman year, like it's okay. But I eventually do want to go to law school, and Boston's law school is a top 20 law school, so there's like better feeder opportunities in terms of like the school that I'm going to. And for political science, so unlike like med and I think business, there's not really like a dead set track that you have to be on. So like if you're gonna go to like med school, I think you have to take like pretty med heavy courses, whereas if you're going to go to law school, you could be like an English major or a political science major or an international major, international relations major. Like it's pretty flexible. You could also be like a business major going into law school. So it's not that like strict in terms of like what you major in. I just wanted to do political science because it's more of the common majors of people who are looking to go into law school. So that is why I chose political science. But like I said, I might consider like either double majoring or switching to international relations. And one of the reasons why I chose like US schools is because it's easier to switch your major than it is to switch your program in like a Canadian university. So yeah, that's why I chose Boston.
Yeah, thank you for all those very insightful responses. And I'm wondering more generally, why did you choose to attend a US university instead of a Canadian one? So are there any particular advantages or disadvantages that you found when applying internationally?
So I think for me, it was like the biggest thing that came up to all of our answers is the flexibility to study across disciplines and to be able to kind of switch majors and to take courses from different fields. So I really didn't know what I want to do with my life. So, and then I have a really, really broad interest. So I think attending a school in the States definitely give you a lot more flexibility to take like really random and interesting electives from like the top-notch professors in the world. For example, like next semester I'm taking an American history class with like 8 of my best friends on campus. We're all like in one little seminar together. And then our professor is like this like Twitter influencer who has like 500K followers on Twitter. It's like really random. But I feel like those like little things can really add up to not just your academic career, but what you know and what you like your feel for the world and your understanding of how the society works as a whole, it really like widens your perspective. And that was a really important thing for me, is that I didn't want to just go into school and just like study linear algebra for my entire life. So that's a really important thing to me. And the disadvantages of applying internationally is, one, we're definitely like they definitely take less people from Canada or from international in general, but I think Canada is at the better end of the spectrum. A lot of the states school do take a lot more Canadians than like people from other countries. So I think, speaking of being international, we're at the better end. I guess advantages is that like each school usually have like a set, not like a fixed number, but they will set a certain amount of spots for internationals. So they will have like, I don't know, some spots, not reserved, but usually they'll take X amount of people from Canada. So you're not really competing against like the wide pool of Americans or people around the world. You're more competing with your peers in Canada. So I guess there is like less people in Canada who are, I feel like it's a growing population, but it's still relatively small compared to like the Americans who are competing to get into Ivies or those kind of school. So I think there is a smaller pool of competition, but again, like those of us who are wanting to go to the States from Canada are usually very high achievers, and we're like pretty, like the average like how competent we are is higher than, I'll say, the average of the American applicants, but it is a smaller pool relatively.
All right, actually, given that Jerry kind of covered a lot of the advantages and disadvantages, I'd love for us to move on to actually discussing more about the application process. So what actually was the greatest setback that you faced while applying to the States that wasn't really a factor when applying for Canadian universities? And maybe this time we could have Maya take this one, or anyone else who would like to support this answer.
Yeah, sure. I can start it off. Just like for some reference, so I didn't actually apply to any Canadian universities because I applied to Penn in the early decision round. And so like that, like for those who like may not be familiar, that just means that you're applying a little bit earlier on and you're saying for like early decision, you're saying like, oh, this school is your number one choice. And so if they accept you, which is usually around December, then you're like obligated to go type of thing and withdraw your applications to other universities. So I didn't really fully apply to any Canadian schools, but from what I know from the American process, like it was just a lot more intensive in the sense of like, oh, you know, you have to like write essays, which I think you have to do for some programs in Canada, but you also have to get like letters of recommendation. You'll probably have to go through like an interview process. You'll have to make an activities list, like that kind of thing. And I think that's just kind of like, whoa, like it's just like a lot. Like when I logged on to like the Common App thing for the first time, I was like, oh my gosh, why is there so much stuff to do type of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Just to echo that, I think I did apply to Canadian schools along with American schools, but along with just essay writing, I think it's a lot of self-reflection. I think the US application process really forces you to kind of reflect on all 4 years of high school and even some of elementary school to really figure out like how you want to communicate yourself to these admissions officers in these schools. And for me, I also applied to early decision. And honestly, applying to the US was a pretty last minute decision for me. I had a couple of friends who were like gearing up for it, like they knew that they were going to do it and like preparing their essays in like all of summer. But I actually only started writing my essays like in September or something like that, because I was like, okay, I'm probably going to do ED, but I don't really know what I want to apply to. So I just took the ED round as like not too seriously. I just took it as a chance to really figure out like what essays I was going to write and how I was going to communicate myself to admissions officers. And so for me, it was like pretty much from, I think, September to like March, where I was just applying to like US schools and Canadian schools at the same time. But I do think an advantage of applying to both is that like I was more focused on like writing my American essays, of course, since there was like a lot more to deal with. Like I had a whole spreadsheet of like, this is all the essays I need to write. But then on the same end of things, I could just like reuse my essays for Canadian schools or like tweak them a little bit to fit whatever question they had. So that was definitely like, I guess, something that I didn't really have to think about as much for Canadian universities, since it focuses more on grades. You're and like a little supplemental, for example. But I will say like the whole process was really rewarding in my opinion. I think it really allowed me to figure out like what I wanted to do in the future, as well as like how I wanted to grow personally, moving into the rest of my life.
Yeah, that definitely does make sense. And moving on to the next question, we do recognize that there's no cookie cutter approach for applying to the States because each applicant is a unique individual. However, for the question for whose panels are actually relevant, are there any non-academic activities you participated in that you believe stood out particularly to the admissions officers? And why is that the case? So this question may not be relevant for all of the panelists, but just anyone who feels that they have an insightful or relevant answer to for this question.
I can go really quickly, but I think like I personally feel like a lot of people that from my school at least who applied to American universities had like pretty much the same extracurriculars going in, like DECA, like some sort of like debate, public speaking, and like a youth council, for example. I feel like that was pretty standard. But for me, I think like like obviously I don't know what the admissions officer was thinking, but I think what potentially made me stand out was I did volleyball for all 4 years of high school, and it was something that really like grounded who I was in high school. So it's a pretty common activity, I feel like, but I think coming from Bayview and coming from this small community, a lot of people end up just taking sports out of like their whole high school equation. So I think that was kind of what was special for me because I really enjoyed what I did there.
I actually would like to echo like the things Kelly talked about sports. I feel like American University particularly value your athletic involvements just because like I agree with this as well, as I think participating in sports really train you, also like really teach you like a lot of like life lessons that are really valuable, that goes beyond just hardworking, sportsmanship, teamwork, things like that. I think people who, if you're excelling at a sport, that is a really valuable aspect that the school look at, and they value commitment and leadership in your athletic endeavors. And then for me, I was a youth basketball coach for 5 years. It's like literally like the smallest thing in the world, but I love doing it, and I like spend a lot of my like writing with my essays talking about it. And I feel like oftentimes it's the smaller thing, and the smaller thing that you're passionate about that really outshine the other things you're less passionate but might sound better.
Yeah, I can definitely understand why admissions officers would probably look at athletics as well, because there's so much you can learn from your sport that you can't actually learn in a classroom setting. So with that, we'd also like to ask, with lots of students, the hardest part of the application is finding their spike, sharing their story. So for some of you guys, like, what was your brainstorming process while writing your common application essays? And if there's like a specific approach or time that you sat down, or like something memorable you'd like to share, feel free to let us know.
I can start with this one. So I started fairly early for my common application essays. I started like April of my grade 10 year. But to be fair, the only reason why I started that early is because that's when we went into quarantine. So I had like a lot of free time. By no means are you supposed, like Kelly said, that she started in September and like she did fine. So like you don't have to, I know some friends who started in September as well, sometimes like as late as October, and still gone to like amazing schools. So you don't have to start like super, super early. If anything, I feel like it stressed me out a lot more to start that early, because I started like thinking about, oh, I could write about this, but then I could write about that. And then I was like, it was kind of a hassle to think about like what I really wanted to write about and what really reflected who I was as a person. Something that helped for the brainstorming process is that when you're writing, like just don't sit down at your computer and like just start like churning out a story. Like that's not how you're gonna find like who you are as a person. A lot of the times, like the stories that you want to write about, the essays that you end up writing is about like what happens in your real life. And in order to like know what about your real life that you want to write about is to like live your life and just like maybe go on a walk, figure out. I know a friend who was like having like a absolute, like, what's it called? Wall block, writer's block. Yeah, he was having like super intense writer's block, and he just like went on like a walk in the park, and he saw like a leaf and like thought about water, and then tried to solve like in like Kenya's water crisis or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is like so cool. So in order to be like inspired to write your essays, don't find inspiration at your computer, because I promise you, you will not. It's really hard.
Yeah, I can jump in here as well. I think like in some like webinars, like the UPenn like application advice webinar or whatever type of thing, they were like, oh, really with these with like your Common App essay, like that, your personal statement, they're just looking for like, who is this person? And also like what kind of like value and what kind of perspective are they going to bring to the campus type of thing? Because really like the Common App is so open-ended in terms of like what you write about that it's really, really up to you type of thing. And so for me, I kind of like sat down, and because it was so open-ended, I was kind of like distraught. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to write about, but it did help me to kind of like think about like, who am I? What do I value? And then I was like, oh, what do I want the reader of my Common App to like take away with them? Like, what do I want them to conclude about me? That type of thing. And then from there, I was like thinking of, smaller topics within that I could explore. And so that's kind of how I went about doing it.
Thanks, Maya. I'm sure a lot of students can learn from your tips and advice when actually writing their common application essays. And additionally, some universities have an interview as part of their application process. So if you went through the interview process, can you describe what that looked like for you and some do's and don'ts from your perspective?
So I guess I can get started with this one. So a lot of the schools, most of the schools are, the interview are not that big, don't play a huge weight. Usually you get an interview if there's like interviewer in your area. But if you don't, it just like is perfectly like fine. They probably just don't have one in your area. For example, I didn't get one for Duke, but I still got into the school. So it's really just an additional part of the application process. And usually like your interviewer will send you an email, be like, hey, is this time good to like go for a coffee? Or I guess now it'll be like hop on a Zoom meeting. And it just like it's very conversational style, right? It's very chill, very relaxed. At least for me, from my experiences, they'll kind of just ask you about like your background and like who you are as a person, and ask you to like kind of tell some of your stories and really just get to know who you are as a person. So I will say like the biggest thing is just to be authentic about who you are, and to really like just treat this as an opportunity to tell them more about yourself, about who you are. And I guess the don'ts are just like act normal, like have like decent social skills, like be humble, like tell them about who you are, but don't like brag, and just like be nice to people. Like I don't think you can really bomb an interview unless you like slap them across the face. So like you just don't want to leave like a really horrible impression. So I say just treat this as like you're talking to a friend, and just like having a very nice like conversation over coffee, or now like over internet or something, and then you'll do perfectly fine.
Yeah, I will second that. I think that the interview is mostly like just a checkbox to see if you're like a normal person or a psychopath. And I doubt anyone here is a psychopath. So just be yourself. It's really like a normal conversation, because most of these people are just like alumni and they're volunteering their time. So take the time to like learn about them and ask them meaningful questions. Like don't ask questions just to ask them and take up time. So do a little bit of prep beforehand, but honestly, like it's not a big deal. It's just like a normal conversation. So yeah, I wouldn't focus too much on this, and I wouldn't be too worried about this part.
Thanks for sharing, both of you, Jerry and Michelle. I'm sure everyone can benefit from those tips you just shared, because interviews can be a little daunting at first for all of us, but now that you've relieved our fears, that's great. So we'd now like to move on to some advice or tips. So actually many students are a part of, IB or AP programs, and we would like to know if you feel that these programs, because I know a lot of you guys were a part of these, if this affected your admission, and to what extent does it make you more competitive than perhaps mainstream or academic students that are also applying to the US from Canada?
I can take this one. So I think schools are actually pretty explicit with how they look at specialized programs. It's always within your school. And so the context is given your application, they look at what's the most competitive thing, or not competitive, but like what's the most academic program you can do at your school. So you won't be at a disadvantage if you go to a school that doesn't have an IB AP program because you were doing like the highest academic level that you were doing at your high school. But it does look different if you went to a school that had an AP program that you maybe didn't participate in. So I think it depends on the context of your high school, and that's sort of how they frame the lens of it. But I think there's never any disadvantage in doing like AP courses outside of your curriculum, but I wouldn't feel like you have to do it to be competitive, because I think like US schools understand what programs each high school has, and like your guidance counselor provides that information as well. So yeah.
I can also add on to this. Alongside all the other Bayview alumni, did IB program, but I also did take AP courses in addition, not because I was just like trying to gain a competitive edge. I guess like the original thought process was like, oh, if I can report these AP scores, that'd be nice. But in the end, I didn't actually end up reporting the AP scores because I didn't do very well on the tests. And I feel like in the end, I took AP macro, micro, econ, and Calc BC. I did pretty well in Calc BC, but it wasn't like a good enough score that I wanted to report, because I actually don't want to like say anything wrong, but like you can report your scores if you would like feel like you want that to add to your application. But like I got a 4 in Calc BC, so I was like, I don't really want to report this score. Like it's not like I didn't want to report it unless it was a 5. So, and macro, micro, econ, I only learned because I just wanted to see like, oh, would I like econ? Turns out I don't like econ. Now I won't be pursuing it in college. But yeah, that's just if you are in the IB program and you're considering taking APs, I believe, was it Thornhill or Thornley? I forgot. Thornley or Thornhill. I don't know which one it is. Secondary school offers outside students to take it, if that's like something that you're considering.
Yeah, thank you. That really does clarify the process. And as well, we do know that letters of recommendations are a very important component. So how did you guys decide which teachers to ask for the recommendation? And how did you go about actually asking for that recommendation?
I can jump in here. I think so for Berkeley, it actually doesn't ask for letters of recommendation. So I didn't do letters of rec for that school particularly, but for most of my other schools, for the Common App, of course, like they all ask for recommendation letters. And in terms of like deciding which teachers to ask, I just went for the teachers who I thought knew me best. Like, and that's not to say like academically, but the teachers who I like had conversations with, who would like reach out to me in the hallways and like ask how I was doing. Teachers who like I could like trust to kind of convey me as like who I was as a person. I remember like one of my friends who applied, like in his letter of rec, the person who wrote the teacher who wrote the rec for him literally was like in the recommendation letter wrote like, oh, I could hear this person like laughing from the end of the hallway. So like little things like that in the letter of rec that like add a little bit of personal touch to like the academic prowess that you might have, really like allow the admissions people to like kind of understand how other people perceive you and how like teachers, for example, like see you standing out in your classes. So yeah, that's it for me.
I could also jump in here. So I asked my English teacher and my history teacher. Personally, I just felt like they were just the closest with me and they knew me like the best out of all my other teachers. Also, they just happened to be in like around like the humanities area that I wanted to study in. I knew I didn't want to study in anything like STEM related. So there was no point in asking like my math or my science teacher. I know like during the process, like a little advice, during the process, a lot of things that people say could like really get in your head. I know like they don't mean any ill intent, but like just everyone's talking about the college application process. You're just like so stressed out all the time. And like one of my friends was like, oh, shouldn't you get like a STEM professor to or teacher to write your recommendation so you can look more well-rounded? And like that really like freaked me out. I'm like, oh shoot, do I have to ask my math teacher? I'm like not that close with my math teacher. But honestly, in the end, just choose a teacher that you feel like knows you the best, that could really reflect who, like write and reflect who you are as a person. And that's really just like the best advice I can give about teacher recs.
Yeah, and then I'll just like jump in really quickly here as well. Definitely like agree with everything that Kelly and Mika said, but I think just in addition as well, in terms of asking them for their recommendation, I say like earlier the better type of thing, just because I think especially if you go to a school like Bayview or HHS, like Markville, whatever, I can imagine a lot of kids apply to the US. And so, you know, the more notice you give your teachers, the more time they have to actually, you know, like write authentically about you, and it's so that it's like not a rushed process and they have time to like, you know, maybe sit down with you and talk about like your activities or talk about like whatever type of thing. So yeah.
Thanks for
I think I
sharing.
just sorry.
Uh,
Sorry. I was gonna say like one really small thing is that like it doesn't necessarily have to be teachers. I think you can also ask, some of them give you opportunity to ask your like supervisors for clubs or like sports coaches and those type of people who might also have close connections with you. Sorry for cutting you off, Olivia. My
No
apologies.
worries. You added a very valuable tidbit at the end that you don't actually have to know. It doesn't have to be a teacher. So that's great. We'd like to now move on to the topic of financial aid and scholarships. So many students are also very curious about the financial aid that's offered at US schools, given that these universities or colleges are usually much more expensive than the Canadian ones. So paying all the fees up front is not usually feasible for many families. Can some of you elaborate on any scholarships or financial aid that you received and how you were able to apply for those?
I think I can get started with that one. So yeah, as Olivia said, US schools are pretty darn expensive. For example, just to put things in perspective, the cost to go to Princeton for full tuition, room and board, everything for 1 year is 78,000 USD, which is about like 100K Canadian, which is like stupid expensive. But the good thing about that is that so there are two types of like when you apply to school, there are two types of school that are like classified based on their financial aid policies. So there are some that are need aware, which means that if you apply for financial aid, that they consider that when for your application. And the other type is need blind, so that the financial aid application and your actual school application are separate. The admission officers don't know if you apply for financial aid or not. And unfortunately for Canadians, most of the schools are need aware. So I think the only like 3 or 5 schools that are need blind to Canadians are Penn, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. I'm pretty sure, and all other, but don't quote me on that. I think this might could change the year when I applied. But all other schools, if you apply for financial aid, it will impact your application, but not to a huge extent. So, for all those other schools, personally, when I was applying, I didn't apply for financial aid at all, just because I wanted to, like, not have the minimum impact to my application as possible. And actually, I applied to Princeton financial aid right after I got in. So most of these, like, I guess, I only know about private schools. So most private schools in the States, they don't have like so-called scholarship. They have financial aids, which are need-based, not like merit-based. So it doesn't matter like how smart you are or like how high GPA you are. Like you don't usually get scholarship. At least Princeton or most Ivy Leagues don't offer merit-based scholarships. You get money from the school if you are based on your family income and your family's financial background. So I think like usually the more rich the schools are, the more generous they are with their financial aid policy. So for Princeton, if your family income is lower than like 100K a year, then you don't pay a dime to go to Princeton. So a lot of these policies really vary between schools, but like I guess the biggest takeaway from what I would say was just to be aware of the different financial aid policies when you apply, and to check if they are need aware or need blind for internationals, especially Canadians.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry. That was a very comprehensive answer. And just posing a follow-up question, throughout high school, did any of the panelists work a part-time job? And to what extent did having or not having a part-time job actually impact your financial situation? So this is more so for students who are currently in university.
Yeah, I can jump in here. So just to give like an alternate perspective to Jerry's answer, Berkeley is actually like a public university, which means that they only offer financial aid to those who live in California, which obviously sucks. But when I was in high school, because I graduated the year that COVID kind of like screwed everything up, I did a full-time internship like after like March hit, because I had nothing else to do. IB exams were canceled, like all that. So throughout high school, I didn't actually do like a formal like part-time job anywhere. I like worked as a assistant coach in my volleyball club, but it wasn't like anything huge. But I will say like the one job experience that I had like after COVID hit and like I got into Berkeley and all that like really helped in terms of like kind of helping with my financial situation, because I knew that if I did want to go to Berkeley, like I would have to either like get scholarships outside of the school or like work a part-time job, work a job or something like that. So it definitely helped in terms of like paying off like a little bit of my tuition per year. But I will say like there are scholarship opportunities offered like from other organizations that aren't necessarily affiliated with your school. Like I ended up applying to a lot of scholarships open to international students. And the thing is like a lot of people actually don't know that these exist. So the chance that you will get money from an organization like this is like relatively high compared to like when you're applying to universities. So I will like encourage you to like apply and look for these scholarships, since it can help alleviate some of that financial stress.
I'll just add a quick thing for this. I think that anything regarding financial aid, make sure that you talk with your parents and have this conversation while you're applying, because I think a lot of students overlook that. And I think the worst thing that will happen is like you get into a school and then you find out like your parents aren't willing to pay for it, or like you can't afford it. So I did work a part-time job, but I don't think it affected my financial aid application, because like they mostly look at your parents' income, because like that's where most of the money is coming from. So yeah, just make sure that you're communicating and on the same page, so you know like how you can approach the situation, because money is a very serious thing. And when you're paying like, I don't know, like $80,000 to go to a school, yeah, you just want to make sure that you know like how things are going to go and you don't want to be caught off guard.
Yeah, sorry, just one more thing. If you have come from like a single parent household, or if like you feel like your parents can't pay for like your entire tuition like in full, just know that like the schools that Jerry listed, which I'm just gonna like repeat once again, I think it was Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and Penn. I don't think there's any more, like it's most of the Ivy Leagues, they are need blind during your application. So I have a friend who comes from a single parent household who didn't have to pay like anything for her freshman year. Like she just had to pay like $75 academic fee, but that was about it. So don't be too worried if you like come from like a single parent household, or if your financial condition is like your parents can't pay for like your entire thing. But I do agree with Michelle, like definitely sit down with your parents and have like a genuine conversation with them, because it's definitely some important factor to take into consideration when applying.
Yeah, thank you to all of you for sharing that, because money is definitely a topic of conversation you have to consider when going to the States as an international student. So moving on, we'd like to hand it over to a couple of our panelists. So this is our panelist podium part. Our first question is specifically for Michelle, who's going into her third year of university. So looking back on your experience these past few years, given that you did have like 1 year of in-person and then it was COVID, what has been the greatest takeaway from university, and what advice would you give to any incoming university students?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say honestly, if you do decide to go to the States, I think one of the biggest things you'll experience is how different the culture is. So keep an open mind and honestly like put yourself out there, because the worst thing that'll happen is like you fail and you fall on your face, but like there's no consequences, right? And it's much more worth it to have that learning experience. And I think I did that coming in, but like you can always do a lot more. Like I didn't know that fraternities or sororities were a huge thing. So like I didn't rush them in my freshman year. And that was like one of my biggest regrets. So try to put yourself out there, and like the worst that can happen is failure. But like failure is bound to happen to you, and don't let that get you down. So yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, I definitely agree with putting yourself out there being a very important thing, especially in new situations. And as for the next question, as many of you guys do know, the student culture at different universities can vary widely. So it's very important to choose a university whose culture actually does align with your personal preferences. So I would like to pose the next question to incoming second and third year university students. So how would you describe the student culture at your program in school? And if it's applicable, how is it different before and after COVID?
Yeah, I can jump in here really quickly. So for me, I was at home for my first semester at Berkeley, but then I actually got the chance to go in person from January to May. So I think in terms of student culture, I was pretty surprised at, again, like Michelle was talking about, a little bit of culture shock, but also just being with being exposed to many people of different backgrounds. Obviously, the buildings and stuff on campus weren't open, but I still got the chance to meet people on the glade, like the fields. And it's really a matter of kind of like finding your community within a new environment. Like I knew nobody going to Berkeley at all. I knew like this one girl from Toronto that I talked to like on Facebook, but that was literally it. So it was like a whole new experience. And coming out of COVID, I also low-key kind of lost some of my social skills. So it was like a little bit of a like shock, you know, in terms of making friends. But I think like Berkeley, in terms of like their student culture, everybody is extremely welcoming. Like everybody has so many like different spikes, different talents, and it's really a matter of like finding who, like what group of people you resonate with the most. So for me, like I immediately started finding people who played volleyball that I could like bond with on the fields and like really get to know them from like a non-academic standpoint. I think like the most challenging part was in first semester for me was that like all of my connections were in study groups or in like classes. And so like once you actually get into person, you're able to kind of branch out and like look for people who are in the same clubs as you, same interests. So yeah.
Yeah, and another like thing that was particularly, I guess, not shocking, but like memorable for me was also I was also home first semester, but I moved to campus second semester. So I feel like being a part of these pre-prestigious school, sometimes it makes you feel like, makes you get the imposter syndrome, right? Like sometimes when I'm there, I feel like, damn, these kids are like smarter than I could ever become. Like, and then Princeton is a very elitist school. Like Jeff Bezos' kid is like a senior at our school, like the ex-CEO of Amazon. We have like a Rockefeller. We have like a bunch of people who are just like daughters of billionaires. So sometimes it's like quite shocking that the people go to school with are like quite like rich, and some of them are extremely talented, and like often that kind of takes a toll on you and makes you feel like quite gonna question yourself and your place in the school. But I think like after a period of time you realize that everyone has their talent and everyone's there for a reason. So like I think a very important thing is to be mindful that you are there for a reason and that the school like admitted you for a reason. I guess this is like pretty far long term, like after you get into the school, but like I feel like for everyone there is a period of time where they start to doubt themselves when they first get on campus and be a part of the community. So I think it's important to really remember that you're a valuable member of the school community, and then you are like an important, and like you make the school better with your presence.
I can just add something quickly. I would say that before COVID, when everything was in person, Penn was a lot more of like a social school. I think they call it like the social ivy, which is true. With like your student clubs and things, like it's just more lively because you're able to host things in person. Like when I joined a club, they like took us to an Airbnb and like we had this like get together and we got to know each other, which is something that suffered, but like it's life and we have to deal with that. But I think the culture is still pretty strong at Penn. I will say it's quite pre-professional, especially for Wharton kids, because some people think that they were like born to do finance, and you will feel that pressure at Penn. So be aware of that. But I think like coming from this environment in Bayview, like I don't think it'll be quite a shock for you, because I think people are equally as competitive here that at like as they are at Penn. So yeah.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And now we actually have questions for incoming freshmen, so Mika and Maya. So given that standardized tests are still fairly fresh in your mind, would you be able to talk about which standardized tests you selected and why?
Yeah, so I was initially planning to take the SAT in March of 2020, and then that got canceled. And so they moved it to May, and I was like, okay, I'll do it in May. And then they moved it to June, and then they canceled that. And eventually I was like, this is just too much. Then I was like, okay, I'll take the ACT, because a lot of people told me that it was kind of similar. So I wrote my ACT in July, and I was happy with my score. And so then I just submitted it. So yeah, the reason I took it was just because I just took whatever was available. In terms of like study tips and strategies, I mean, like for me, I know that I'm the type of person who learns best by like practice questions and learns best by doing, as opposed to like reading like tips, tricks, whatever. I learn best by actually doing practice exams. So that's what I was doing. And I thought that was relatively effective. So like for SAT, you can use like Khan Academy, like they have their free thing online. And it's like super well fleshed out. For ACT, I think there's like ACT Academy, and I also had like a ACT prep book thing that I was using. So yeah, that's what I was doing.
Yeah, thanks, Maya, for sharing your experiences. And our last question is actually specifically for Mika, as she chose to go test optional while applying for COVID. So I'm just wondering why exactly you decided to go test optional, and for future applicants, in what situations would you recommend going test optional?
Yeah, for sure. So same situation as Maya, because like of COVID, there was just like it just kept getting canceled, and I kept rebooking it, and it just kept getting canceled again. And also, the SAT is really expensive, like especially for international students. It's like in America, like they give you a free, I'm pretty sure they give you a free test. Like you get like one free chance in like junior year, or is it that they like pay for your PSAT, which is like you don't have to worry about the PSAT. It's not for Canadian students. But yeah, it's like really expensive. It's like around $100. So like I kept like paying the money and then getting it refunded in the end. I was gonna take the ACT as well, but I think I had some trouble like registering. I'm not exactly sure. I have like really faint memory, even though it was only like a year or two ago. So in the end, I did do test optional because I just didn't have a score to submit. I did study it for it though. I was like studying for it for like around 2 years, 2.5 years, like since grade 10, 2.5 years, I guess. No, wait, since grade 10. Yeah, like I was studying for it for like quite a while. So if you want like any study tips, just the more tests you do, the better you will see like your score will. Like I remember like when I first did like the first test I got like was like a 1300. It was not a good score, but like the more you like do the test, the more like you can see your score improve. It's really just based on like how well you can recognize what they're asking for from you, and like seeing the patterns within the test, because it is a really like pattern standardized test. Let me just read this question properly. Yeah, so factors was just that I didn't have a test score to submit. I was a little nervous because it is better to have a test score than to not have a test score. But for those people who are going into grade 12 and you've been like in quarantine since grade 10, don't freak out, because I know a bunch of people, like I have 2 friends who didn't submit any test scores and they got into Harvard. So it's really just it's not something you should like stress about. So because if you don't have a score, like don't stress about not having a score, because there's like nothing you can do about it, you know. Focus on things that you have within your control. So for me, I spent a lot of time on my essays. Like I said, I started in like April, so it was like a long time spent on my essays, and focus on the things that you can control. So like your grades in school, your essays, your teacher recs, like make sure, well, you can't really control your teacher recs, but like, you know, building up that relationship and things like that. So Yeah, that's my advice. If you want to go test optional and you're not happy with your score, go test optional. Just submit what you want to submit.
All right. That actually concludes our general question portion. However, we do have 3 or 4 questions or so from the general audience, so we'll be happy to address those now right before we go into the breakout rooms. So first question, if you're a panelist and you'd like to answer this, how important are marks in high school for applying to American schools? Like which grades are the most important? Do they look at all grades through 9 to 12, or what are they really looking at?
I can jump in here in terms of like what schools are looking at in terms of grades. For Berkeley, the application process is actually very different from most of the other schools since Berkeley doesn't accept the Common App. So the application process that you will be going through is slightly altered. It's like their own portal. You have like other things you need to submit, like your work experience. Like you get like 20 activities instead of 10, and like a lot larger of a word limit. In terms of like grades though, Berkeley requires you to self-report all 4 years of like grades, all the classes that you've taken. And so in terms of like how important they are, honestly, like being very objective here, or not very objective, but very blunt here, I think grades won't like really hurt you as long as you are above a certain threshold. I think a lot of schools just like look for a certain average, and that like brings you to the next round of like essay evaluation. It's not really something that they like really hone on, and like they're not going to take someone who has like a 99 over a 98, you know. So looking for that as well as an upwards trend. I think like if you are applying to a school that looks like all 4 years, it's more important to like if you have struggled in a year or something, like it's more important to have like that trend towards like your grade 12 year, seeing that you've improved, or if you did have like a specific test that didn't really go so well, there is a chance to like maybe explain that in the additional info section. But honestly, like for me, I wasn't like the top of the top of the top of the class at Bayview. And I don't think like that really hurt my applications in any way. So yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense having that upwards trend as an indicator rather than the absolute grade that you got. And then for our next question from the audience, they're wondering for those who did apply to scholarships, are there any websites for applications that helped you find these scholarships?
Sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, really quickly, because I think I talked about this really briefly before, but for applying to scholarships, I looked at internationalstudent.com, I think /scholarships or something like that, because it's kind of tricky applying as a Canadian to like scholarships since you're not actually in a Canadian institution, but you're also not an American citizen. So it's like a weird line that you have to like play for applying to a scholarship. So internationalstudent.com was like, it's like a database of like all different organizations that want to post their scholarships there. So that was a resource that I used.
Okay, don't take my word for this, or like you can like research it yourself, because I'm not familiar with this. Like I've only been told to look at QuestBridge, I believe, for if you're like low income or in a tight financial situation. I think QuestBridge, it might just be for American students. I was told like of the website, like I heard of it from my friend from Florida, so it might just be an American thing, but like do your own research. Like I don't know if it's open to Canada, but I believe that if you like apply through QuestBridge, they'll either like they'll give you a lot of benefits in terms of like money wise, and also I think you receive your decision a little earlier too. Like it's a different process, but once again, I don't know if it's open to Canadian students. I've only just heard of it like if for students in like a certain financial situation.
All right, thanks for adding those little tidbits for both of you. Our final question that the audience has posed is anything that you regret or you would do differently in the application process? This is a tough one.
I feel like I regret spending so much time on them. Honestly, like maybe that's not the answer that you're looking for, but for me, I spent like an absurd amount of time just like stressing over it and kind of sacrificing meeting new people and my like social life to a certain extent, working on these things. And because COVID literally hit as soon as I finished all of my essays and all of my applications, it was a little bit sad because my senior year was like occupied by all of this. I like yeah, I feel like in a certain sense, like you will feel like you want it, like you need to stress out about these things. And of course, you can't really control that feeling in the moment. But looking back on like all the actions that I took, I do think it was a little bit unnecessary to go that hard. Really, just like I don't really have much advice for like how to deal with those emotions in the moment. But I think coming from someone and like I'm sure like all of you guys as panelists feel like pretty similarly. I think just looking back on it, try to relax as much as you can, like have it's your grade 12 year, and I think like that's something as well to keep in mind, like don't waste your grade 12 year just like writing all these applications, right? You want to have some memories to look back on like when you're in university. So yeah.
Yeah, those are definitely great points. And this brings us to the end of our question period. So now we will be opening up the breakout rooms for you to be asking more university or program specific questions. If you need to be assigned to a room, just stay behind and let us know.
And if you feel you need to take a screenshot of who's in which room, feel free to do that so you can easily hop around from different rooms. And then for our panelists, feel free to head into the breakout rooms now, and an MC from Ignite Fair will be joining you soon.
And also as an additional reminder, please return to the main room after the breakout rooms close, as we will be announcing the winner of our university panel giveaway.
See you all in a bit.